Welcome to the Strong, Single and Human podcast, a real look at single parenting, the ups and downs and how to navigate life with kids on your own while keeping sane. Covering subjects such as domestic violence through to fussy eaters and solo dating. I'm your host, Claire Martin. Welcome.
My guest this week has a doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Queensland and is a member of the Australian College of Clinical Psychologists. She has worked for Triple P International for the past 15 years, providing training and support to practitioners and agencies in Triple P Positive Parenting Program, the world-renowned evidence-based program developed at the University of Queensland, Australia, and has a particular interest in child and adolescent anxiety. When she's not working, she enjoys spending time with her family and friends, drinking tea and walking her cocker spaniel, Lucy.
Welcome, Jane. Thanks for agreeing to spend some time with us and tell us about your story and about anxiety in children and teenagers and what that looks like and, how we can help. So first of all, let's take a step back. Doctorate in clinical psychology and an interest in child and adolescent anxiety. Like, how did you get there?
Well, when I left school, Claire, I, like many people, didn't know what I wanted to do. And I actually started studying commerce, which was not suited to my personality at all. But I started doing that. And then at the university that I was at, I was able to, it was quite flexible. So I was able to study different subjects. So I was hopeless at accounting, but I started doing this subject called group facilitation and training, and it was part of organisational psychology, so you could major in organisational psychology through the commerce degree. And I started getting interested in that and thinking, that's really interesting. I'm liking this. This is more my cup of tea. And then what I did was I changed over. So I finished the commerce degree, but I changed over and started psychology after that, thinking that I would probably do organisational psychology because that would make sense because I had a commerce degree. And then I thought, actually I find this really boring now. And I like clinical psychology, which was more sort of interesting to me. And so that's how I got into psychology and clinical psychology. And in actually my honours year, I did after my honours year, actually, I worked as a research assistant on a program for children with anxiety.
Oh.
Yeah, and then later on I came back to that to study that in my postgraduate degree as well. So I did another program with children with anxiety then.
So that's sort of how you really got into being interested in the child anxiety game, as it were.
Yeah,
okay.
That's right.
Okay, so look, what is anxiety? How does it look in children?
Well, anxiety is our body's response to the expectation of threat or danger. So it's a little bit like our inbuilt alarm system.
Right,
so,
like our fight or flight.
That's right, yeah. And actually some people say fight, flight or freeze now as well. Freeze.
Yeah, sorry, yes, you're right, yeah.
And so if you imagine that you're crossing the road and suddenly a car comes speeding towards you, your inbuilt alarm system is set off, and that helps you to react to the situation. So it protects you from harm and you get out of the way of the car. So in many situations, anxiety is actually helpful because it protects us from threat or danger. But like any alarm system, it isn't perfect. So sometimes we can experience anxiety in situations that aren't dangerous. And just like if you imagine a smoke alarm that goes off at when the toast is burning, that's not perfect either. That's like our anxiety. Our inbuilt alarm system isn't perfect either. And for some people, their alarm system is triggered more easily than others as well. And so it can be complicated to sort of tease it out, but it's part of it's made up of different systems, anxiety. So, for instance, you've got a physiological system. So if you think of that alarm system being triggered, what you might notice in your body are physiological changes. So you fast beating heart, or you might have butterflies in your tummy. And often we're quite aware of those physiological changes. When we start feeling sick in our tummy or we've got a headache, we're aware of that. So that's one system. But another part of that anxiety puzzle or system is what we call the cognitive system. And so that's the things that we say to ourselves in our head. And often we're not so much aware of those, not so much aware of that. So if we imagine that a child gets invited to a birthday party, for instance, and on the way to the party they notice that their heart is beating fast and they feel sick in their stomach, that would be the physical system. Now what then might happen is that the child starts saying to themselves, I can't do this, no one's going to talk to me, everyone will think I'm weird. So that's those thoughts that are going inside your head. So that's that cognitive system. And then so what might happen there is that then the child might say to their parent, I don't want to go, I feel sick, I just want to go home. And so they might avoid the situation. That might be the thing that they do in the situation. And that's what we call that behavioural system. So there's 3 sort of different systems and they all interconnect to create that experience of anxiety for us.
Wow. Okay. And I've just noted it down actually because I want to go back because you said there are some people who, for them, anxiety, they're more predisposed.
Predisposed?
Yeah, that's the word. Sorry, trying to get my teeth around the right way, to anxiety and things like that. So is that something that is nature or nurture? So is that genes or is that what they pick up from people around them as such?
It's a really good question. And it's actually often a combination of factors. So we know that certainly genetics play a part, like most things. So anxiety runs in families. We know that, so for instance, if you have anxiety, often you also have other members of the family who have anxiety as well. Okay.
But is that then picked up because members of the family are anxious and you as a child, because let's face it, kids between the ages of 0 to 3, kids in general, just are so acutely attuned into parents, family, people around them that things like anxiety, depression, anger, all of the different, and I'm just naming all the ones that are maybe negative but happy and joy and positivity, all of those things influence the child?
Sure. So it is a combination. So when we talk about, you're right, when we talk about anxiety running in families, obviously that can be related to genes or it could also be related to the family environment, can't it? So it is a combination, but we know from research, for instance, from twin research with identical twins that, genetic influences play a part. But you're right, certainly so do family influences as well as other things in the environment too. So things at school, friendships, other activities, they all play a role as well. And in addition to that, you've got, so some children are born with an anxious temperament, and so they're more likely, and if we think of temperament, think of it like personality, like a personality trait, for instance.
Yeah, and I can see that completely. Yeah, no, definitely. I could, yeah. And some kids just have an innate extra security system where they go, well, I'm not jumping off that brick wall that's like, 6 meters high.
Yes.
But then I know kids who will just go for it and jump off it and they have no fear factor whatsoever.
Yes.
And I know it's not from their parents as such. I know it must be from in their genes or whatever. I don't know, but yeah.
That makes sense. So for some children, they're much more inhibited than other children as well. And you can get, as you said, those two extremes where you've got children who are very wary and then children who possibly aren't wary enough, for instance, as well. Yes. And so, but for anxious children or those children who have that anxious personality when they're born, anything new or any change in their routine, they can find very upsetting as well. So you've got things like, in terms of the things that cause anxiety, you've got you've got a genetic factor, you've got a temperamental factor, and now even with research with neurobiology, for instance, they've found some information or some research showing that the part of the brain called the amygdala can be overactive in children as well. And when we were talking before about that flight, fight or freeze response, the amygdala is responsible for that response. So that makes sense too. So that part of the brain is being more easily triggered as well.
And the amygdala is where in the brain, just so people are aware?
Oh, now you're testing my
knowledge. Oh God, I'm sorry. So the cortex, right? So just so the cortex is a bit at the front of the brain, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
That's okay. Just so people aren't confused, because that's the bit at the front of the brain which says that, children, this is what is growing and developing between the ages of like 0 and 3 or whatever, is the cortex, and empathy and emotion and all of that stuff in the cortex. And the amygdala, and this is where I need to Google it while we're on the podcast, I think is more in the center, isn't it? And somebody please tell me. Anyway, but that's okay. I just didn't want people to get those two bits confused, because I know the cortex at the front is what everyone is talking about. Everyone, when you bring children up, that's what everything refers to, is that front part of the brain, but this isn't the front part of the brain. And while we're on here, I will Google it and find out where that is. Sorry, it's all good, it's fine. Okay, sorry, I stopped your flow.
Right. And the other thing that I was going to say in terms of what causes anxiety, so we've talked about genetics, temperament, those sort of environmental influences as well. And the other thing is some children will experience a traumatic event or a stressful life event, so which can then lead for some children to develop a fear of, so for instance, a child who might be bitten by a dog might then go on to develop a fear of dogs, but that's not necessarily the case. So often it's a combination of factors, and a lot of these things that we've talked about, though, you can't really change. But what we talk about, those environmental influences, so things in the family, things at school, friendships, they're more likely to be able to be changed than genetics or temperament. Obviously, they're fixed.
Okay. Yeah. So we all, it's natural for us to have this anxiety, or a level of anxiety, isn't it?
Absolutely. So
because it saves us, doesn't it?
Sure, it's very helpful. Everyone experiences anxiety, and it can be helpful, but it can also be unhelpful if you're experiencing too much anxiety.
Well, this is the thing. So this is what I was sort of, because you can be anxious, and anxious sometimes is classed as nerves when you're going on stage, or if you've got to talk in front of people, you can be anxious. But that's good because it's it's getting your brain sparked up to get into action and things like that. And like you said, crossing the road, anxiety crossing the road, maybe not, but the fight, flight or freeze situation, they're all good. They're all healthy for us. Being anxious about jumping off of a 6-meter tall wall, it's probably a good thing, because you might break your legs. There's all these, it's all a risk analysis as such. But then when does anxiety really become like a problem? And especially, like, I can understand from an adult perspective when anxiety would become a problem and you're anxious to like leave the house or deal with work situations, etc. But like, when does it become a problem within children, and how do we recognize it?
Well, it's fairly similar in terms of children as well. It's when it becomes so distressing that children become so upset that it stops them from doing things that they need or want to be able to do.
Okay, that's a good description.
Yeah, so for instance, a child being worried about being away from their parents, so they're unable to, they find it really hard to go to kindergarten, or they're worried about something at school that's happening at school, and so they're refusing to go to school. So that, when it gets to the point where they're avoiding situations or becoming so distressed about entering a situation that they need to be able to do, then that's when you would sort of say this is a problem, and maybe we need to access some sort of support or help with this.
Yeah, and so like things like what potential things would do parents need to watch out for? Because look, I know that when my son is anxious or under stress, he just doesn't sleep. He is through in my bedroom like, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. And I've grown to know that over the last probably couple of years. So last year of kinder, first year of school, because there have been certain things that have happened within his life. And now I sit there and I recognize, because unfortunately, I've found out like after the fact. And you go, oh, now I understand why you weren't sleeping. That's fair enough. And so now I'm really cognizant of like, oh, he's not sleeping. Let's just keep an eye on what's going on and, speak to his teacher, etc., and find out what's happening in his world, to try and understand and deal with that situation. But like, are there anything else apart from obviously the things where the children are verbalizing, I don't want to go to school, etc.? Is there anything else that may come to mind regarding signs that you've got an anxious child?
Well, I mean, it's a really good question, because obviously some children...
There's probably hundreds though, aren't there?
There are certainly, lots of different ways that anxiety can be expressed, and it will be different for different children. And I think you're right with your own experience as a parent of that you've come to realise, as you said, in your own son, that certain behaviours are a bit of a sign to you that he must be feeling anxious, because I think parents do know their children best. And they learn these things over time, don't they? And so, but you're right, sleep disturbance is really common for children with anxiety, and also eating disturbance.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, because he just gobbles everything down. But you're right. Yeah. Exactly.
If you're feeling sick in your tummy because you're nervous, then you don't necessarily want to eat so much on school mornings, for instance. So they may not. See, some children don't express their anxiety verbally. So they find it hard to express their feelings. So it might be more subtle signs like that, where they're not sort of eating much for breakfast, for instance, on school mornings. It might be that they're complaining of headaches, or asking sort of questions is another way that children will show their anxiety. So checking for reassurance from their parents, checking it'll be okay. And it can look really different, because if we think of anxiety, we tend to think of kids who are anxious as being quite shy and clingy and withdrawn, quiet, not having a lot of confidence. But actually anxiety can look quite different for children, and in some cases it can look more like aggressive behaviour or shouting or yelling, and particularly if we move into those older age groups as well, in those teenage years as well, it can be quite difficult to tease apart from what we would normally put down to, oh, they're just going through adolescence, versus anxiety as well. Even overactivity in kids, or what we would sort of say is attention-seeking behaviour, where kids get a little bit silly in some situations, that the underlying cause of that can be anxiety as well. And for those children, it's just difficult for them to verbally express it, so they're expressing it in different ways. And it's particularly common in boys to see that sort of irritability or even physical aggression.
Wow.
Sometimes, in schools, those children may be labelled as bullies or troublemakers, and in actual fact, underlying that behaviour is anxiety. Not in all cases, obviously, but in some cases. So it's important to explore that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And does sometimes, and it's just in the back of my brain here, like, does sometimes an anxious child get labelled with like the ADHD sort of label, or autism or whatever? And I know I don't want to sort of put you in a position, but like, because I know there's a fine line between all of that, and it's such a like, all of this is such complex situation, because it is really down to the individual child, and you as a parent knowing your child, and the school coming on board and supporting you as well, and you all getting together to help your child. But I just, with some of the things that you're actually mentioning regarding the aggressiveness, regarding the the various different things that are cues for potential anxious child, they could all be misinterpreted as well as the ADHD and autism sort of spectrum stuff.
Well, what tends to happen with autism and ADHD is actually you often find children with those conditions also have high anxiety, so they sit alongside each other.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily a confusion of a diagnosis, but actually a lot of children with autism also have a lot of anxiety. So, for instance, changes in routine can cause a lot of anxiety for children with autism. But
that was exactly what I was thinking. That when you brought that up, I was like, okay, so transitions, changes, etc. So potentially some of these things could highlight the fact that, well, maybe there's something more, having an anxious child, there's something more underlying, and not the other way around, which is how I put it. I'm not very good at putting things this morning.
Well, what often you can have children with anxiety, obviously just anxiety, but with children, there are children who have other conditions as well, like ADHD and autism. But in addition to that, they will also experience anxiety as well. And so it can be a little bit difficult to tease out sometimes, but those conditions also have other symptoms that you look for. So from a diagnostic perspective, that professionals are very good at kind of teasing all of that out. But it's very, very common to see anxiety amongst both of those conditions.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So if you're finding that your child is being anxious, is sort of coming across with some of the cues that we've said, like not eating, not sleeping, asking the questions, just generally not doing well with change, transitioning, etc. Like what can parents actually do? What's the first step?
Well, there's lots of different ways that we as parents can respond, and some are more helpful than others in the long term. So, and there's not a right way to respond in every situation as such. So it's a little bit about being flexible for the situation and having a range of different sort of strategies or responses, because sometimes a child might be anxious about a situation that's coming up, and other times a child might be anxious about a situation right in the moment as well. So sometimes you have to have a different ranges of responses or strategies. But if, for instance, we imagine a child has a fear of dogs, and so whenever the parent and the child are together, maybe walking to school, and they see a dog, imagine that they cross the road to avoid it. So in the short term, this reduces the child's anxiety.
Right.
Because they're safe.
Yes, I see.
But in the long term, what happens is by crossing the road and avoiding the dog, the anxiety continues, and in most cases it gets worse over time as well.
Right.
And so because the child's not learning that they can cope with their anxiety, they can cope with the situation, and that catastrophic thing that they think is probably going to happen, the dog is going to attack me or bite me, doesn't happen.
Yes.
So they don't learn that. And so one of the things that parents can do to help children manage their anxiety in the long term is to encourage them to face those situations that they find anxiety provoking rather than avoiding them. And children can avoid them in obvious or subtle ways. So that's an obvious avoidance. A more subtle avoidance is when we were talking before about the child going to the birthday party. Imagine they go to the party, but they're on the outskirts of the party and they don't really interact with anyone or talk to anyone. That would also be a way of avoiding the situation. even though you're still in the situation. So it can be a little bit complicated to tease out.
Yeah.
But helping children to face those situations rather than to avoid them is really important in terms of helping children to manage their anxiety in the long term. But it's easier said than done, obviously, because sometimes children can be really distressed. And, of course, as parents, it's really hard for us to see our children in distress. And it's natural for us to sort of stop the distress or to reduce the distress. And so taking them out of the situation seems to be the thing that works.
Yes, and I'm not sure. There was a Greek, there's a Greek philosopher, good old David Blaine. I was listening to David Blaine this morning, and David Blaine was afraid of spiders. So he had real anxiety around spiders. Bearing in mind, this is David Blaine, who holds his breath for 45 minutes or whatever it was, 17 minutes. And, you know, it does all these crazy, crazy stunts where he goes without food for 44 days and, you know, stuff like this. But he was afraid of spiders, and it mainly came from his mother. And
was she afraid of spiders as well, was she?
Yeah. And so that, in a way, that nature, nurture, whatever. And but it was interesting because he then said that he had to immerse himself in. He went to Africa and like basically was in a tent, and like he made friends with all the creepy crawlies and bugs and stuff in the tent because they were a lot better than the hippos that were sitting outside the tent that were wanting to rip him apart. So it's very bizarre. He said he just immersed himself in it, and you know, and there's apparently Greek philosophers, and I don't know whether it's Aristotle, Socrates, whatever, and I was trying to look up who it was actually, who used to dress. So he was very conscious of what people thought of him, and so he actually decided that he would dress in gregarious colours and various different things. So it made people talk about him, and it made people comment on him. So he actually then dealt with his anxieties around people's views and opinions on him. So it was interesting. It's quite interesting that we're having this conversation, and I was listening to it this morning. So thank you for that. So it's like immersing yourself in it seems to deal with that fear as such. Well, it's the fear, anxiety as such, and maybe I've got confused and muddled up by anxiety and fear there. But yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because I suppose the immersing to me sounds like something that we would probably call flooding, which is one technique. But in the program that we have at Triple P, which is the Fearless program, what we encourage parents to do is to do it in a very gradual way and a very planned way so that children don't become too distressed and that they feel confident in moving. We call it a fear ladder. And so the idea is you break a fear down into small gradual steps and you practice those steps over and over until you feel more comfortable to move on to the next step. So you start with an easy step. So in the example of the spiders that you gave us, the first step might be just looking at spiders in a book, for instance.
Okay.
And so you might do that and practice that every day until you feel kind of okay with that. Your anxiety around that has reduced significantly. And so then the next thing might be to watch a video of spiders, because that might be a little bit harder than looking at a picture because the spiders are moving.
Yes.
And so you're gradually moving up, doing slightly more difficult things each time until you get to the point where you might be able to, maybe your goal would be to hold the spider in a glass in your hand, for instance. It depends what you want to get to, really. But so you do it in gradual ways. And the same would go with, as we were talking about, the fear of the dogs. You wouldn't just go to the dog park and stand there. That might be your final step. That might be the final step, but breaking it down into really gradual steps so the child feels confident and comfortable at each step when they're practicing. So
And look, and being wary, I have to say, and my God, if you saw the spider that was on my curtain a week ago, yeah. So I also sort of go, become a single parent, and then you have nobody else actually to deal with the spider that's sitting on your curtain, and then you've got to really go and deal with it. And all the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up. Even now, I talk about it, and like, yeah, good old Huntsman's. But having that innate fear of spiders and dogs and stuff like that isn't a bad thing either. So I suppose it's getting that, because there are dogs out there that are a little bit unhinged and potentially don't like kids and will have a bit of a chew, or same with postmen and adults and stuff like that. So and I suppose it's really understanding the dog's brain and how they're actually working as well. I'm not sure anyone can understand a spider's brain, apart from the fact that it's just spinning webs and wanting to eat stuff, and not us really. It's more afraid of us. But okay, so I understand. So that is your fearless course that you've got within Triple P. Is that the right word for it?
It's a program, yeah. So it's an online program, and there's 6 modules. And they take about 45 minutes or an hour for parents to complete each module. And the great thing about it is that it's self-guided, and so and it's online, so parents can do it in their pajamas with a cup of tea, and they can keep on coming back to it. So they don't have to sit down for an hour to complete a module. They might just do 10 minutes and then they come back to it when it suits them as well.
Okay. And so is this something that the parent then works through
that's right.
on their own and then will implement with the child, or does your child sit with you? Is this sort of like tips and hints on how to deal with anxiety in children?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's actually just a parenting program. So
right.
So it's not something necessarily for the child to do, but it's information and strategies and ideas for the parents to then help teach their child how to cope with anxiety. And what's quite unique about it is that instead of focusing on just one child in the family, the program talks about it being a program for the entire family. And so to use it for all the children in the family, and ideally for the parents as well. So all the family members are trying out the strategies, because another thing that we can do as parents is think about our reactions to anxiety as well. And when we're stressed and anxious, how do we react? And what are our kids sort of learning about how to deal with stress and anxiety by watching us as well? So being aware of how we react is also something that we talk about in the program as well. But there's lots of different parts of the program. So would it be helpful for me to just go through?
Yes. Oh, yes, please. Please go through. Yeah, let's go through that.
In terms of the modules, we start off talking about what is anxiety, what does it look like in children, what causes anxiety, and we've talked a little bit about that before. And then once that's covered, because the modules are completed consecutively. So once you've done that, and if you want to sit down and do a couple of modules together, you can. So it's not limited. It's very flexible in terms of how you want to access the program. And then the next module is talking about how can we promote emotional resilience in our children. So what are the things we can do as parents to help our kids become more emotionally resilient? And what we mean by that is help them bounce back from situations that can be challenging or stressful. And what are the things that we can do as parents? So it goes through a range of different ideas. And then module 3 is talking about that cognitive system of anxiety that we were talking about earlier. And so what we cover in that module is helping parents to learn some ways to teach their children to be flexible, realistic thinkers, which is really important when it comes to anxiety as well. And then in the next module after that, parents learn how to help their children to overcome avoidance. So that very common way in terms of behaviour that we tend to respond to in anxiety-provoking situations is to sort of escape the situation or to try and get out of it. So what are some ways that parents can help their children overcome avoidance? We look at that. And then in the next module, which is module 5, we look at ways that parents can respond to children's anxiety. And we look at all the ways that the most common ways. I think we cover 13 different ways that parents can respond to their children's anxiety. Some are helpful and some are less helpful.
Right.
And it's really encouraging parents to consider which ones are the more helpful ones in terms of the long term versus the short term. And that can be really useful for parents to sort of have that information, because it gives parents a few more options, because often when parents are managing anxiety in children, it can be really frustrating and it can be really stressful for parents. And often you get to the point where you just feel like you've run out of options almost.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And you don't want to see it. Nobody wants to see their child in an anxious, painful state as such. And when I mean painful, I don't mean like physical pain. I mean like, well, it can be physical pain, like we've said, where they're not eating and they've got stomach ache and headaches, or, nobody wants to see your child like that. But also sometimes you sit there and go, well, I don't know what to do.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so often the go-to for parents of anxious children is to either be overprotective or to become frustrated and impatient.
And I suppose angry, the frustration.
The frustration builds up.
Yeah.
And both of the, and sometimes it's a combination of those responses too. And all of those are very understandable.
Oh, exactly. Oh, no, exactly. And the thing is, but potentially, like you said, they're not helpful. So I suppose sometimes they could be helpful, but I'm thinking not very many times.
Yeah, so that's why that module can be really important for parents, and they find it really helpful to see some different ways of responding to their child's anxiety.
Yeah.
It can help build their child's confidence in their capacity to cope with anxiety-provoking situations. So that's a great module. Well, they're all great modules. Parents find all the information that's covered really useful, and parents will be different in terms of what they find useful anyway out of the module. And then the last module, we look at how we can teach children to problem solve, because often children with anxiety will look to other people to solve their problems. They look for their parents to tell them what to do in a particular situation. And so this is really about promoting children to become independent problem solvers. So we cover some steps around that as well.
Okay, that's cool. Is there at any stage with an anxious teen or child that you need to say, okay, I can't do this myself. I can't use the Fearless Triple P program. I really need to get extra help. At what stages as a parent would you be saying, right, I need to, and where is there extra help out there?
Well, I think the online program is always a great starting point. And depending on where people are located, it's actually free for some parents as well, depending on.
Oh, okay, cool.
In Australia. And the best way to sort of find out more about that is to go to our parent website.
Yeah, which is at the Triple P.
triple-p-parenting.net.au.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And head across there, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's now free in Victoria and also in Queensland.
That's right, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come on, WA, South Australia, Northern Territories, and also New South Wales. Yeah. Come on, we've got anxious children out there that need our help.
Yeah.
And, but I feel sure it's in those two states that it's free.
Which is really exciting, I think, because more than ever now with the pandemic and the increase for anxiety in children and also parents. I mean, from our research, we know that, children are experiencing a 70% increase in anxiety in terms of the symptoms that they're reporting. Parents are reporting over 200% increase in their stress and anxiety since the pandemic. And so,
Oh, look, definitely. Look, I completely agree with you. I mean, I've been very, very lucky. I still have a job all the way through the pandemic, but there are people who have lost their jobs. And being a single parent during a pandemic where there is just you in the household and there is just me here and I don't have any other help. So if my son comes back from school and has COVID, well, it's highly likely I'm going to get it. But then there's all the anxiety around, well, you know, if I get it, do I get vaccine? Do I know, you know, and all of those things. And being a single parent, you know, you're doing it on your own basically, and you can't lock yourself away in the, you know, master bedroom with the ensuite or whatever and hope that, you know, your partner's going to look after your children and not get COVID because you are the only one there. The buck stops at you. So I completely 110%, especially like I know I felt anxious at the beginning of the pandemic because none of us really knew what was going on and what was happening and whether to wear a mask or not wear a mask. And I suppose we've got a little bit used to it as time has gone on. And it's, I suppose we've just handled it however best we could. But completely, I completely agree. Anxiety, has definitely went through the roof for me a couple of times over the last couple of years. I don't know what effect that had on my son either. Do you know what I mean? Because he's obviously picking up on all of that.
Sure. And I think that certainly our parenting has changed. You know, obviously when we're feeling more stressed and anxious as parents, that affects our ability to parent as well. So I think it's just helpful for parents to acknowledge that there has been an increase in anxiety and stress for everyone during the pandemic, whether we're aware of it or not. Even I think just that ongoing stressor has lifted our anxiety levels without even necessarily being aware of it. We've got, as you said, we've kind of got used to it. But I think that we need to be a bit more mindful of that and bit more kinder to ourselves as parents, because we need to look after ourselves first. And before we can then sort of, it's like that oxygen mask analogy, looking after yourself first and being mindful of that you are more stressed and anxious probably than what you have been over the past couple of years. And that's affecting, you know, everyone in the family as well. And children are more anxious and stressed as well. And you put that combination together. So being mindful of that and looking after yourself and taking some time to try and relax, whatever that looks like for you and however you manage that, particularly for sole parents as well, as you mentioned, it can be a lot more tricky, and just being a bit kinder to ourselves first and then as a result kinder to our children, I think can be really helpful to remember.
I think you're right, Jane, because there was a lot of stress. I call it stress and pressure, but I suppose it's anxiety really around homeschooling. Look, you're in Brisbane, I'm in Melbourne. Melbourne was one of the, you know, it's the longest lockdown city in the world, right? So there was a lot of anxiety around, well, what is homeschooling? What affects this homeschooling? And my son's 6, so it was his first year at school. And what, you know, maybe potentially some people would say his first year at school, you don't need to worry about that. It's okay, he'll catch up. But there were other children, obviously, who are, you know, in year 6 and who are like in really important phases of their lives, and they were being homeschooled. And so the anxiety as a parent around, you know, I don't want them to watch YouTube, I don't want them to play this game, you know, all of that stuff was like, well, what are the effects of all of this on, because I need some sanity time as well. And you're right, we need to all just give ourselves a break, take a step back, take a deep breath and go, okay, we're now in endemic maybe stage, and let's start moving forward. What can we do? I know we've lost we didn't lose the last 2 years, because I'm hoping we built built bridges and enhanced our communication with our kids, and because we're all at home homeschooling. But it's now about moving forward, and who knows what's going to be happening with China and the Ukraine, and and all of this is still, it's all still building on that anxiety. So and look, I think what you guys are doing at Triple P, and the fearless program is awesome. Even better that it's free in certain places. Come on, the rest of Australia, sort it out. Look, I think it's great what you guys do, and it's you've got so this is just an online course. There's not like you don't go somewhere to learn this. This is just online, isn't it?
It's primarily online, but we are starting to train practitioners as well.
Yeah.
And so at the moment that we're in a process of doing that. So we started doing that last year. And, for instance, we do have some practitioners trained in Victoria and Queensland, and we've trained some practitioners in other countries as well, which is really exciting. And so that's starting to grow, but that will take time. So for parents, if they're interested in accessing the program, the best point at this time is to really try the online program and
awesome.
See how that goes. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Look, Jane, thank you for coming and speaking to us today and telling us what anxiety is and all the various different things that can help us manage it with our children. Look, I have one final question to ask you. If you had a superpower, and maybe it is to take away all the anxiety in all the children in all of the world, but if you had a superpower, what would it be?
Well, it's a great question, and I wouldn't want to take away all the anxiety.
Well, that's true.
We talked about it being helpful, didn't we?
Yeah.
So it's not eliminating it, but it's about being able to manage it effectively. So I think my superpower I'd like to be able to travel through time. I'd be a time traveler.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Because I think you could go to all these important times in history. I could revisit times in my own life.
I was going to say you could go back and go, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that degree in like commerce or whatever. I'm just going to get straight into the clinical psychology and like get on, because I love that. I think, and who knows whether Elon Musk or any of those other guys will have given up on space and actually be looking at, or maybe they will find some parallel wormhole in space that means that we can actually time travel. That would be interesting. Apparently, according to all these, and philosophers are the wrong words, but these, like, Nostradamus, and I can't remember her name now, but there was a Eastern European one, they reckon that in the next so many years, we will discover time travel. So you may get your wish.
Well, that would be great. I'm not hopeful because I'm thinking I'll be too old and I'll be dead by then, but perhaps...
Maybe. I think both of us will be, but you know, who knows?
I've
be great to
the amygdala for you, just to back to that. So it's in, as you said, it's not far from the hippocampus, so middle part of the brain. It's called the temporal lobe, and it sits on top of the brain stem. Yeah,
it's like a little almond-shaped thing, isn't it? Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah, there we go. They're about the only two places I know in the brain. The rest of it's a mystery to me. But hey-ho. Awesome. Thank you for that, Jane. Thank you. Cool. Well, look, time travel, I think, is really, really good. I think it's brilliant. Definitely one I would want. Definitely a superpower that I would want. So, look, thank you so much for, because you're really busy. So thank you so much for coming and joining us today. And hopefully, if anyone needs to know any more information, I'll put all the relevant blurb in the podcast details. And get in touch with Jane and Triple P and see if that can help with the anxiety in your children, teens, or yourself.
Thanks, Claire.
No, that's cool. Thank you. Thanks, Jane. Well, I'll speak to you later. Okay. Thanks. Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please hit subscribe wherever you like to hear podcasts. If you'd like to support us further, share this episode with your friends and family on all the usual social media platforms that you're normally on. And finally, drop us a review on iTunes, as I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments, and ideas. It all helps me to understand and produce awesome content that I know you're going to want to hear, like this. If you want to check out past episodes, write to us, appear on the podcast, or for links, resources, and show notes, go to our website, www.strongsingleandhuman.com. We are also on all the usual social media platforms, Insta, Facey, and Twitter. Have a wonderful week, and I hope to see you back here again soon. Be kind to yourself, and remember, no one's perfect, and we're all just putting one foot in front of the other and doing our best. I'm Claire Martin, and you've been listening to the Strong, Single, and Human podcast.